Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and I'm on my own. I'm usually joined with Connor, and we talk about a show together, but he's on vacation. We have a new Netflix show. We have The Haunting of Hill House, which launched today, so I'm going to be covering this on my own, episode by episode. It's going to be season 1, episode 1 is called Steven Sees a Ghost, and I laughed out loud when I saw that title, because I didn't see it when I first clicked play. I just kind of went for it, and then it was afterwards I was checking the title for this, and I was like, "Oh, that's the name of the episode." That's very blatant and very straight to the point. But yeah, Haunting a Hill House. This is not based on the haunting, but it's the same house. It's the same setting, I guess. But it's not based, I think, directly on the book or the movie or whatever. Obviously, The Haunting was a movie in 1960. Then there was a remake in like '99. I think that had Liam Neeson in it. It wasn't very good, but the original's pretty good. And this is directed by Mike Flanagan. He's directing all 10 episodes, and he's notable. He did, fun enough, Carla Gugino's in this, and she was in his last film, which was a Netflix movie based on a Stephen King book called Gerald's Game. So that was last year. So they kind of teamed up again, but he's done a few things. He did a few other horror films, and he's been kind of an interesting director. Hush, I thought, was pretty good. He's kind of made some solid movies. There's definitely potential in his direction, but I think he's not never quite hit it right out of the park yet. But he's good enough and solid enough in what he does that it was exciting to a horror TV show, 10 episodes, all by this one director, someone who has been reasonably solid already. It was kind of exciting. So obviously it's October. It's just in time for Halloween. Good time for it. So since it's episode 1, I will start spoiler free. I'll give you a warning before I go into spoilers. So we'll just start off with the premise, the general thoughts, good, bad, that kind of thing, and we'll go into spoilers and plot details later on. Not a ton to spoil on this one per se, because this one is definitely the introduction of all the characters, and there's quite a lot of characters, or it's a lot once you add in the fact that there's young and old versions of both of all the characters, because you have two timelines in this show. You have present day, where the kids of the family, the Crane family, who are central characters, are all adults, and they're all ranging from, I don't know, the youngest one is maybe 25 or something like that, and the oldest one's maybe close to 40. I don't know the exact ages, and then you have the past timeline where they're all kids, ranging from like 5 to, I don't know, 12 or whatever, which makes no sense given the ages I just gave for the adults. But you know what I mean? They were all kids in the past, now they're all adults, and in the past, their parents were these caretakers to a point where they came in to renovate houses. So they stayed in the house while they were renovating them, and then they'd leave once they were done and the house was sold. But they'd buy it. They'd buy the house, renovate it, and sell it. And they stayed at the Hill House for a period of time, and some crazy stuff seems to have went down. And there's different attitudes from all the different characters, all the kids now they're adults, and how they look back in those events. And this first episode, is largely introducing us to each of those 5 characters. There's 5 kids, and what they're like in the future, what they do in, I said the future, present day, what they do with themselves, how they interpret what happened to them as kids, but not outright showing us a ton of what actually happened. And I'd say Steve gets the majority. Or yeah, he gets more than anyone else. It's definitely, and I mean, his name's even in the episode title. He's the skeptic. He's the one who doesn't believe anything, and he's kind of a paranormal investigator, but he doesn't like that word, as he points out. Paranormal is just normal that we don't understand yet. This kind of thing. So he doesn't like that word. It makes it sound too fantasy. But we meet him, and he's written a book about the time they had his kids based on what everyone else told him, even though he doesn't believe that he ever saw anything. And we get this great scene where he's interviewing this woman who thinks she saw her dead husband after he had a car accident. And it's a really effective scene because it's all just on her. We don't even see his face. This is an introduction scene as an adult, and we don't, until the interview is over and he presses stop on his recording on his phone. You don't see him until the end, and the entire thing is her. You hear his voice, obviously, but he's only there here or there. What you only really hear is her telling this story of seeing this ghost. And it's a really well shot scene, and it's very tense despite the fact that you never see anything. It's just someone telling a story. And that's a really good sign for me early on in terms of direction. Even the opening of the episode, which starts in the past, and it's basically, it's a classic supernatural horror movie scene where one of the kids thinks she's seen a ghost, and the parents kind of try to, like, hey, it's just dreams, and you'll be fine. And she brings up this character, the bent neck lady, which I didn't quite catch what she called her at first. I was like, what lady? The bent neck lady. Actually, it made me think of Japanese horror more than anything, to be honest. The idea of the long-haired lady with the crooked kind of neck. But she's scared, and after the dad comforts her, he goes back to bed, and there's a really great little simple moment of directing here where after he's checked on a few of the doors and we get a sense of how many kids there are, he leaves, and it's this big long gothic hallway, and it just kind of sits there, and the camera just kind of tracks in a little bit really slowly, as if it's, something may happen, and it just cuts to him getting in bed. But because it was so quiet before, the sound of the sheets moving as he's getting into bed, the crinkling of the sheets, is so loud that it's basically a jump scare. But it doesn't feel cheap. It feels like it's almost lulling you into, you're just waiting for the tension breaker, and then it hits you with this normal mundane sound. And it, like, sometimes some movies will use this really cheaply, especially with telephones ringing. Maybe just because that one's overused, but that one kind of worked for me in this, and it was a good sign, because I think I always bring up how a lot of directors who aren't very good will use jump scares in place of talent, and I don't think that's the case here. I think Mike Flanagan knows how to do a jump scare. There's a few scenes in this episode, and I think what I want to say about this show more than anything, after the first episode, is that it genuinely feels like a horror TV show. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean that it genuinely feels like a horror TV show? I don't know if I've seen a TV show that genuinely feels like a horror film yet. Partly because you have to pace them differently, partly because you feel like you have to add in all these extra plots to justify it being a TV show. I saw a good chunk of season 1 of Scream, which was terrible, but it didn't really feel like a horror TV show in the right way. I've seen a couple episodes of American Horror Story and thought it was really mediocre. Credit to The Walking Dead, I suppose. I suppose The Walking Dead is a zombie TV show. I can't really fault that. I guess what I mean is anyone that I've seen that's kind of, a premise that I would typically think of as a movie premise where you've got a ghost in a house or anything like that. I've never seen it successfully kind of translated to a multi-episode series of some kind. I don't think I've ever seen that. And I feel like the opening of this episode, by the time the titles roll, there's already there's a good fake out scare, and then the final moment where you kind of get a glimpse of something going on, is already enough to go, hey, this is confident. This feels like a horror movie. This feels like, it could be a Conjuring movie or something like that. It feels like whatever. I mean, it separates itself from those things because as the episode goes on and it starts jumping back and forth through the timelines constantly, you're like, okay, this is a little bit different. This one's a bit more of a puzzle and it's going to be jumping around. And we spend time getting to know each of the characters, and that's one of the skills this first episode really has to do effectively is try and make it easy to follow which kid is which adult. When we're jumping between timelines, and it does it fairly effectively, where you kind of get, you'll get a scene of one of the adults, and then it'll cut to them as a kid, and it'll cut back to them as an adult to kind of show that, okay, that's that one. Because obviously, eventually, we'll catch the names of all the characters, but you're not going to get them immediately. And we have 5 characters. Steven's the skeptic, like I say, he's been writing books. He doesn't really believe in any of it, and the woman who he's interviewing surprised at that when she thinks she assumed that he'd believed in all of it because his books were so good. But he's just good at writing it. He's just good at taking it and putting it into a good story. And then you have the next. Well, I'm going in order of age. At least I think I'm going in the right order of age. If I might get 2 of them flipped. I'm not really sure about the third and fourth. But then the next one down, we have Shirley, who runs a funeral home of all things, and she's kind of the responsible one who kind of gets treated like the oldest sibling, but isn't really. Stephen is, and she is just frustrated that he's not been very helpful. Interestingly, the kid version of her in the past is played by Lulu Wilson, which is very notable because Lulu Wilson was in both Annabelle the Creation, which I think was Mike Flanagan that directed that as well. Let me just double check that. I just want to confirm that, but I think he was. Let me just double check my information here. No. He did Ouija Order of Evil. He did one of them. He didn't do the other one. Okay, that's really funny. So, because I was about to say she was in both Annabelle Creation and Ouija Origin of Evil, which is the one he did. Annabelle 2 was someone else who was also kind of in the same range in terms of filmography. But anyway, regardless, she was in both of those movies, and I was kind of joking after I realised she was in both movies that she's kind of like a young stream queen. And seeing her in this, I never recognised her completely at first because, kids age pretty quickly. So even though she's still quite young, she shot those two movies pretty much back to back about a year and a half before this. So she looks really different. She's got different hair. The whole thing's just, a completely different vibe. But so it's cool to have her here though. This feels like, this is like almost, I don't quite say horror royalty. She's not that acclaimed yet, but it was like, she's kind of an ongoing horror actress now. So that's cool. So we got that, and then you go further down, and we have Theo, who's the third sister, and she's gay, and we get her about halfway through the episode, and it does this thing when she's in a nightclub, and she's kind of the she's got this really sexy introduction. She's in a nightclub, and she's kind of looking around as if she's like casing the joint, and who does she want to have sex with that night? And there's this guy smelling at her, and then she doesn't look very interesting, and she turns around, she sees this girl who smells at her, and then she smells back at her, and it's like, okay, very quickly, very visually, we're told about her sexual orientation. But then we get some more information about how she is, and she's not someone who wants a committed relationship. She wants one night stands. Her sister Shirley even says, you're like a frat guy. This is the worst. She's staying with Shirley in present day. She's staying in the little side house to the funeral parlour. So they're together, because it's worth noting they're all spread out as they're adults. They're all in different cities and states and whatnot. So that's her, and then next down we have I think next we have Nell, who's the last sister, or the third sister. I said Theo was I thought of Theo as the third sister because she was introduced last, but Nell is the youngest one, and she's the one as a kid who's to believe she's seen the bent necked lady, and she's kind of messed up, and this is whatever happened to these kids has clearly affected her a lot, and the others kind of look at her as being a little bit mentally ill, a little bit damaged, a little bit kooky. And like, oh god, what does she want now? That kind of attitude. And then Luke, the youngest brother, he is in rehab. He has drug addiction problems, and we get introduced to him last. He comes quite late in the episode, to the point where we're not even sure, because I actually thought it was weird. I was like, wait, why have we not seen him yet? We know there's a fifth sibling. Why have we not seen him in present day yet? And I think it was just a case of picking its times of who was relevant to what was going on and so on. But it jumps around, and it's not even like everything in the past is linear. We jump into we're in the middle of that story at the start of the episode, and then there's a flashback later on which is set before that, and we're going to be jumping around and get interested in other characters. There's references to the Dudleys, who are the two sort of caretakers who look after the house. We get a brief scene of each of them. In fact, the Mrs. Dudley has probably the one thing. It's been a long time since I've seen the Haunting, but the one thing that's kind of referenced in this movie is part of her dialogue, where she keeps talking about it's not even talking about something specific. Because she's having a conversation with Stephen, young Stevie, who. And she's talking to him about because he's the skeptic. Even as a kid, he believes more in science, and he believes more in fact and whatnot. And she's very religious, this Mrs. Dudley, and she's trying to talk to him about how no, science will only get it so far. Schools are too adamant on that. You need the Lord, you need Jesus Christ to get you through the night. He's the light in the darkness. But it's not so much the topic of what she's talking about. It's the way she phrases something. She says it twice, where she ends a sentence by saying, "in the night, in the dark," and that was a line that was in the original movie. That was a big line that was said a few times in the movie. The way that the woman who was going kind of crazy was phrasing it, it was a nice little callback to that. I think it was the most famous line from the movie. So having a character kind of get that in the first episode was a neat touch. Now it may not be the last time we hear it, but it was effective in the moment in this one. So yeah, the episode spends its time. The main gist of this first one is that Nell is worried that something's happening with Luke, and she tries to call everyone else, all the other siblings, to get them to do something, and they all kind of ignore her and are going about their business, and they're only kind of mildly concerned. And that's kind of the premise of this first one, and what that boils down to by the end. The rest of it is introductions. Steven's got a bit of a plot. I'll get to that in a second when we get to spoilers. But that is basically the gist of it. And I would say I'm feeling quite positive. Like I say, there's a scare at the end as well. And the scare at the end worked for me fairly well. It was kind of obvious, it was kind of predictable what it was doing, but at the same time, when it actually happened, it was effective. And I think the reason why it was effective was it was handled fairly well in the scene, don't get me wrong, and it was effective in a kind of creepy way, not in like a I'm scared way, but it had like a nice bit of character to it. But I think what made it effective is that it felt like the payoff to the plot of the episode, as opposed to just a cheap scare for the sake of having a scare at the end of the episode. It felt like, no, this is rounding out the arc that we set up at the start of this episode, which is impressive that it has that, because with an episode with so many characters to introduce, it could be very easy to just get lost in the shuffle of that, and I wouldn't even blame it for that too much. But no, it's here's your swerve for one of the characters so that they have something to really think about getting into episode 2, and that's kind of what the episode ends in. So far I'm feeling quite positive. I think it's handling the creepiness quite well and the scares quite well. It's treating the story like a puzzle. I will say that right now it feels almost a little bit too straightforward in terms of, okay, creepy stuff happened, a family member went crazy, and there's debates for years whether or not there's something supernatural actually happened, and now something's happening again. Right, that's the gist so far, and it feels like it feels like, how could we get 10 episodes out of this? It feels like we're already a third of the way through the story, which means I'm sure there's going to be more swerves and more twists and more things that are going on, and more mythology that we're going to unravel as we go. But right now it kept it fairly simple, and I think that was also important, given that it was jumping around so much, given that they were jumping around so many characters, young and old versions. We're jumping between different time periods, sometimes like 3 times in one scene essentially. I think keeping the actual plot and the premise simple just now was a good way of keeping that, just stopping it from being too complicated. I think it'd be overwhelming if the plot was super complicated and we were jumping around the timeline constantly. It would be like, Westworld, but even more complex. As it is now, because it keeps the general through line quite simple, it's not too hard. And it does a neat thing of like sort of setting up, or at least doing some nice edit tricks where it'll cut to something that relates to what we were just having in the scene. So, like I say, it'll cut from the old version of the character to the young version, which will then cut to the old version again, and then who they were talking to on the phone, it'll cut to them, and so on. Like, it'll neatly sort of daisy chain the through lines so that you're always kind of following on. It's never just randomly jumping around, as much as it might sound like that when I'm describing it, going back and forth constantly. It's keeping its eye on, the like I say, the through line of how it's been put together. So that's cool. That's really good. I think it's one of its strengths right now. I think handling its direction is quite good. The characters are fairly well defined at this point. Steven is not bad. He's not like the most interesting guy in the world, but I think right now, for the skeptic, he's oddly understanding for a skeptic, I think, in a horror story like this. He's very understanding of why people think they see things. He kind of tries his best to be sympathetic to them. He doesn't get, it'd be very easy for him to offend the person he's talking to when he's explaining why he doesn't believe anything. But he feels very, very genuine. He feels very forthcoming, and he doesn't belittle people when he's talking to them. Certainly not as an adult. But so no, interesting. And the setup that he's kind of like that, and he was kind of raised like that from the get go. And you get that some of the other characters have their own quirks, like Shirley, talks in her sleep, and so on. So we have all these different things going on. So yeah, that'd be my spoiler-free thing. I'd say it's pretty good. It's pretty promising. I'm actually excited to see the rest. I'm surprised at how long the episodes are. A lot of them are 60 minutes almost, if not on the dot. 55 to 60 minutes. There's one that's like 40 something, and there's a couple that are like 70 minutes. So this is a meaty season. This is, compared to Maniac, which me and Connor just did, this, like, this is probably twice the runtime, just because the episodes are generally that much longer, or close to, at least. Probably like 30 to 40% longer overall. But yeah, so it's got some atmosphere. It feels very confident in its style and what it's doing. So I'm looking forward to more. So I'll take it out of spoilers. So full spoilers now for the rest of episode 1. So Stephen's plot this episode, like I say, he's investigating this woman's house, and she's seen her dead husband. She tells this great story about how he was in a storm and he crashed his car, and she woke up with water dripping on her face, and he was hanging upside down with his face. And she's so descriptive. I think what makes this work is that she's descriptive enough. It's almost like she's reading it from a novel, right? It's that descriptive, and you get a sense of it. But we don't get to see it because we're kind of still in this skeptical side with him. Like, we don't know if this is true yet. Is this too much to take on board right now? And he kind of spends the night there, and he gets some water, and he's like, no, you've got a leak upstairs. The horns you're hearing that woke you up, that's just the traffic outside. The stop sign that's meant to be there's not there. You can see where it's missing. And he kind of writes off everything else you said as, no, you kind of wanted that. Even if it doesn't seem like you'd want to see him like that, it's still better than him never seen him again. So he kind of explains that. But again, he's very gentle how he does it, and he even says, "Yeah, I'll write your story in my next book, and I'll take some liberties, but I'll do it in a way that you'll like and you'll respect. And your husband was a fan of mine. I'll do it in a way that he would have liked to." And so we get a sense of what he's like. We get a sense that he's having troubles with his wife. They're separated at the moment. She tries to defend him because there's a flashback. The only time we go to a different part of the timeline as adults is there's one scene where, and it's very neat. It tells you what part of the timeline it's in because Shirley's pregnant in this scene, and we meet Stephen's wife, and she's defending him because Shirley is pissed that he's writing this book about Hill House. This is the one that he kind of gets famous for. She's pissed that he's writing this book, because it's like making their parents look crazy. Because we see in a flashback, of course, the one big flashback we get, outside of like some small scenes of the mum Olivia, which is Carla Gugino's character, her like sleeping next to Nell on the floor so that she feels safe and all bits like that, is that we see that one night the dad Hugh grabs all the kids, runs out of the house. There's a great scene. It's actually a really good scene because I forgot to mention this. I mean, not that I was getting any spoilers, but before, there's a scene where before we take Steve, because Stephen's the last kid to get out. We don't see him taking the rest of the kids out. He just rushes into the room and he's like, "Hey, you need to get ready to go. We're going to run. Wait here." And they're watching the doorknob turn, like who's on the other side of the door, kind of thing. I actually thought there was someone standing in the background of this scene the entire time. It looked like a person in like a really sort of like frumpy suit, like a guy, like an old man in a suit, just standing in the background over young Stephen's shoulder. It looked like that the entire time. I don't know if I was mistaking something else, but I thought he was going to start moving at some point. But then he runs out, and we just get glimpses of what looks like the mum running around crazy, like she's psychotic. Like this house made her go crazy. And people for years have called the dad a nut job for and thinking he might have killed his wife because she died that night after he ran out of the house with all the kids. And and that's partly why Shirley's so upset, is because all this stuff's been said about him and the family for all these years because of what happened at that night in the house. But yeah, so the big thing with Nell is that she thinks the bent neck lady is back, and she calls her dad. The dad's still alive. Hugh's still alive. He's much older, of course, and he believes her. Like, this is the thing. Like in the opening scene of the show, the opening scene of the first episode, he tells her, dreams are like water, and kids especially, your dreams are like oceans, and when you wake up, sometimes you get a little drip, and that's what you're seeing. Like, he's very convincing the way he talks to her about how it's not real. And when she calls him as an adult and says, "I think the bent neck lady is back," he sits up out of his bed and he believes it. He has his own little scare. He wakes up from a nightmare. It's like his dead wife's like lying in the bed next to him. And again, it's a fairly well done little scene. The pacing of the scares is really good. I think that's partly why the episodes are longer than maybe most Netflix shows, or not most actually. Some of them are overlong. But I think why the pacing's longer and why I never felt it in this is because to do horror properly, you have to have the slower pacing. And while horror movies tend to be quite short because they keep things simple, this is this weird concoction of an entity, because it's doing the slow-paced horror scenes, but it's doing this really complicated narrative structure where it's jumping around and presumably a more complicated plot as we go. So in order to give time to set all that up and set up all the characters, because this is way more characters than we normally have in a horror movie. I mean, sure, a slasher movie will have a lot of characters because they're all just there to be killed off. But these are all characters. These are all characters we're going to get to know and evolve. And even by the end of the episode, we find out Nell is dead. We find out Nell went into the house. She wasn't going to her brother's like her dad's told her to. She was going to the Hill House, and she's dancing in the Hill House on her own, as if she's got her arm around someone, dancing, ballroom style. And all of the other siblings all wake up. This is the first time we see a look, actually, but they all wake up at the same time in a cold sweat, and they're all terrible. And in fact, and specifically, Shirley, who talks in her sleep, wakes up and says, Nell's in the red room. And we saw in one of the flashbacks that her and Nell really wanted to get into this one door. They couldn't get into it. There was a red door where none of the keys would unlock. And, we see a scene where Mr. Dudley gives them what's supposed to be the master key, but even that doesn't work. So it's just a scene of them trying to get into this room, and they're talking about how they're frustrated, that they want to get in there, and they're theorising of what ridiculous thing might be on the other side of the door. Is it a pony? The younger one, Nell quips. And it's obviously not, but they're trying to get in there. So we have this red room reference, so I think that's going to be important going forward. But they all wake up, so implying there is something going on, of course. And then at the end of the episode, we have the scene where Luke's kind of basically looting Stephen when he gets home, and he's got his laptop, or not his laptop, sorry, his iPad and an old camera. And Stephen's just is understanding. He says, "Hey, I've got $200. I need the iPad. Don't take that. I'll give you money." And he says, "Sorry, it's not what you think." And he gives him the camera back as well, and then leaves. But he's got the money. But when Stephen gets upstairs, and I kind of believe him that it's not what we think, because I assume it's too obvious that it's just drugs, right? Like this is more to do with the plot. Whatever he's doing, something Nell's asked him to do, or he's in trouble with a ghost or something. I don't know. I'm throwing ideas out. But when he goes upstairs, he turns on the light, and Nell's standing in the corner, and I immediately said it's not really her. And I didn't necessarily think she was dead. Admittedly, I thought that because I knew she was at the house obviously the night before. I assumed that this was like an echo of her, or she was going to like fade away in front of him or something. But then his dad phones and says Nell's dead. She was at the house. She's dead. And he like realizes and turns around. She comes up right next to him. This is the end of the episode where she does this demonic scream in his face and then disappears. And the final shot's just him lying in the middle of his big empty, because he's got a really empty house. It's a really big empty apartment. He certainly doesn't spend that much time here seemingly, because it's just really empty and clean. And he's just lying there on his own in the middle of the floor, just in shock. And that's when we go to the credits. And it's a really great final moment. And like I say, the scare, it's kind of the ghost coming up and screaming in your face isn't necessarily my favourite type of thing. But it's handled well enough, and I think the reason why it works, though, is because it rounds out this arc where he's the skeptical one. He doesn't believe he's ever seen a ghost, not in the way that people think of ghosts. And here he is at the end. He sees someone who he knows he's just been told is dead, and then she disappears in front of him. And he's lying there in shock. And I think the empty apartment's probably a visual choice, because when he's lying there in the middle of the floor on his own, he is genuinely on his own. He's in this big wide empty space. It's clean, it's clinical, there's no one here, it's not lived in. He is alone and empty, and you get the idea that he has been alienated from his family and even his wife now. And we don't get to hear exactly why they split up. He says, "Can I come and talk to you?" Because he has to phone her about Nell possibly showing up at the old place, because she doesn't know that he's moved. And his wife says, "Well, you know what you have to say, so is there any point in you coming over? Are you going to say it?" And then she hangs up. So I don't know what he's going to have to say. I don't know what he did specifically. I'm sure we'll get into that. But he seems to alienate people around, even though he's very like kind and genuine about how he approaches things. It seems to have alienated him from everyone who's close to him. Like, it's fine when it's someone he's only knows casually, or it's like a stranger. But anyone who's close to him in his life, his attitude, the way he approaches these ideas, seems to have alienated him from everyone. And I think this visual at the end of him, it's him in shock because he's just seen a ghost, but it's also him. I don't want to say that he realises this right now, because he's not had time to actually process it, but it's just the idea that he's lying there and he's alone, and now he's going to eventually realise that he's alone because he's not believed all these things, and it's all true. Han Solo gif, it's true, all of it. But he's, that's why the visual works. He's there on his own, just completely empty. And now I assume we're going to see them all together next episode because they'll have to get together for a funeral, I imagine. Yeah. So obviously I expect them all to go back to the house at some point. And we'll see where that goes. I think it's interesting. I'm just noticing that Nell, the actress, is listed for all 10 episodes. So, either we're going to get a lot more of her as a ghost, we're going to get a lot more of flashbacks, because we're jumping around in the timeline. There's all these possibilities for how we'll see her again. But I'm curious to see how much and in what context. Does she somehow come back? Do we get good ghosts? Do we get bad ghosts? Do we get all these things? Do we get the history of the bent neck lady? All these interesting questions, and I'm into it. So no, first episode was pretty solid. We got a big cast. Like I say, 2 versions of most of the characters. Getting used to which one matches up with who and so on. But so far, solid. Scares work. Direction is confident. Characters, for the most part, are interesting. I mean, they're not like the best ever necessarily. Like Steven, I think, is good enough for now. I think Theo is a little on the heavy-handed side, but good enough for now. But I'm assuming we're going to dig a bit deeper as we go, and we're going to get more as we go of each of these characters. So that's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to that. And like I say, the other stuff so far is working. Pacing, despite the fact that it's long episodes, I think the pacing was kind of working for the build up of the scarier stuff. Even though, of course, that only happens. Like I say, there's a scene earlier on in this episode where it's just a woman describing a scare, and it's actually kind of effective in how it's paced and how descriptive she is and how it ramps up. So, no. So yes, I'll be back with the next episode very soon. Very soon. At the very least, this will be one a day, and I can guarantee that with this show because Connor's on vacation, and it's just me doing it every day. And there's less things otherwise to record because, again, no Connor. So here we are. So if this is the first time you've ever seen from this channel, normally it's more than just me. Normally it'll be me and someone else talking about the movie or the TV show. There's a comics podcast, all these other things. It's probably worth mentioning since this is a horror TV show. We have a horror movie podcast, which I do with Tim, called Screams After Midnight. We do a lot of extra episodes for October, a lot of big heavy hitters for October. But we have an episode every week anyway. Even the rest of the year, but October's a big deal, so you'll be seeing a lot of horror movies going up over this time. And if you're on the audio feed, then you're on the Netflix audio feed. There's other audio feeds. Go to the Patreon. I usually plug the Patreon at the end, patreon.com/mailedfuzztv. If you want to support the channel, the show, everything else we do, you can go over there. You get some stuff early, you get some access to votes and other things and blah blah blah. But even if you don't want to be a patron, the top post has a link to all the different audio feeds, all the different shows we have on YouTube. So it's kind of a quick, easy list of things, access to different things. So yeah, go have a look at that. Get us on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to get me specifically on Twitter, it's at Wooble89. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you very much once again. I will see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?